Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to YPOers, HBSers, GSDers, and others around the world. Thank you so much for joining this global conference call on psychedelic medicine and mental health. I want to welcome everyone and point out that this is a pilot. My name is Dick Simon. I am chair of the YPO Psychedelic Medicine for Mental Health group, which now has over 150 members. Also chair of the YPO President's Action Now Gold chapter, and significant to the potential of what we'll be talking about today, past chair and co-founder of the Peace Action Network in YPO, which was YPO's first network, which both introduced YPO to the potential for non-geographic affinity connections, and me and so many others to the incredible potential of YPOers and others working together to have massive impact. But because this is a pilot call of this network, both conceptually and technically, so hopefully everything will work, but we may at some point need to ask for your forbearance. You're very valuable and appreciated guinea pigs, if you will, in this process as to how we can work this out and have a series of calls. For those not familiar, YPO is an international business organization with over 29,000 members in 130 countries. It's the premier business organization of CEOs in the world, and the idea is through that we can have incredible impact on issues that we care about. This network potential is amplified in this case by combining the multiple networks, adding YPO with Harvard, with Stanford, with others, with huge potential in the area of mental health and psychedelic medicines. The intent of this call is to bring together those interested in that area in mental health, psychedelic medicines, and to build a community for those who are interested in the potential of everything from addressing mental illnesses that are classified under DSM-5 to the overall better mental wellness for what are called healthy normals. Those with interest and potential capacity, financial, energy, whatever, to make a difference in this space. And again, this call is modeled after what really got the Peace Action Network and YPO Network started, the idea of having calls, connecting people around the world who then can choose to get engaged in any ways they choose to. I want to be very clear that this call is about creating a safe space for talking about science, research, organizations, and impact related to mental health issues in legal or above ground activities. And because of the topic of psychedelics, I want to point out this is not about sharing any underground or personal experiences. The call structure will be George Goldsmith, who I'll introduce in a moment, will speak, and then we'll have an opportunity to interact with questions that George will be able to respond to. And then at 45 minutes after the hour, we'll have the opportunity for those on the call to be talking about projects or areas of passion they are involved in within this space. This call will be recorded, and there will be opportunities that I will point out later on as to how you can be finding out more and becoming more involved. So it's my honor to introduce and to thank my very good friend, George Goldsmith, who is the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Compass Pathways, that is doing leading work in navigating mental health issues, and in particular at this point is working with psilocybin for treatment-resistant depressions with trials around the United States and Europe through the FDA and the European Medical Association. As just a bit of background on George, George was very involved within YPO, both in PAN's founding, the Peace Action Network founding, and as a member of the YPO International Board, overall, the instituting networks throughout the organization. So it's my honor and privilege to turn this over to George Goldsmith. George, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Dick, and I hope everyone can hear me all right. It's an honor to be part of this and to be part of doing research, since that's what we'll talk about today, and it's the research inside of the research of how to do these calls. So thanks so much for that, everyone. As Dick said, I'm George Goldsmith, and I'm really looking forward to sharing a bit of our journey. I didn't realize 20 years ago when Dick and I were working on the Peace Action Network that 20 years later we'd be working on the Inner Peace Action Group. And here we are. I'd like to talk a bit about how we got here. So I'm a YPOer, actually an OPOer at this point. I'm in my mid-60s. And I never imagined doing work in this area, quite frankly, of mental health care. I've been a serial entrepreneur, very much focused on issues of collaboration, most recently collaboration between business and government in regulated sectors, including the pharmaceutical sector, where I led a group of governments and the pharmaceutical industry working on how to get the right medicine to the right patient at the right time at a cost society could afford. And that work yielded some new approaches to drugs regulation in terms of creating legal safe harbors for collaboration between regulators and drug producers in order to accelerate promising treatments and have them reach patients. As I was busy doing that, I was remarried, and I had my wife brought her 16-year-old son into our marriage relationship, and wonderful, incredibly sharp young man, went off to university, and he really started suffering from depression and OCD and really had all sorts of difficulties. Being a YPOer, I thought, how hard could this be? We'll just get him the best help. And in fact, we did that, but the more he was treated, the worse he was becoming. And this really started a journey for us to really understand the realities of people who are really trying to work within the system, the current healthcare system for mental health, and realizing how challenging that can be. As we moved in, we started talking about this with our friends, our own journey. What was really striking to us is how many other people we spoke with when we shared our stories started sharing their story. And for the YPOers on the line, these are people I've had in forum and been very close to, but this was an area that people weren't terribly comfortable talking about. What happens when a family member or even ourselves, we suffer? And we're human and we do suffer. But what happens when traditional treatments don't work? And I think this is really key, that we all, either ourselves, our family, friends, colleagues, etc., this always, we're all affected here. And so I think this notion of really looking at how can we share more about what we're going through and really look at how to improve this situation. So my co-founder and my wife is a physician. She is a public health researcher, and she's an activist, so much so that a few days after the 9/11 crisis in the US in 2001, she was at ground zero with another physician actually treating the people doing the cleanup because she felt it was so important. That work became the congressional study of the health effects of 9/11. So together, between my regulatory background and her medical background, we were really spending a lot of time doing research. And one of those things that we learned about was psilocybin. This was in 2013. We came across a paper that was investigating psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, an active ingredient. And it turns out to be potentially quite powerful in working as an antidepressant as well. And so we started to see that research. We met all the researchers at Hopkins, Johns Hopkins, NYU, UCLA, London Imperial, University of Zurich, where work was going on with psychedelics, which had pretty much been quiet for almost 40, 50 years since they were made illegal in the 1960s, after almost 20 years of earlier research. So this was something that was really very important and interesting to us. And had been studied before, but had gone through a quiescent period. And some very brave researchers were now looking at this with modern research technologies, looking to see how psychedelic medicine might actually be reintroduced. The more we learned about this work, the more positive it became. And I'll share in a moment some of the data that led us to see this. But I think the key story here is that we have huge unmet need in depression. And I think one of the ways that that's starting to manifest itself is just every 40 seconds, according to the WHO, somewhere around the world, someone commits suicide. In the same 40 seconds, nearly 20 people attempt suicide. Every one of those people is in a social setting. It actually is something that permeates our society, where this level of loss, this depression that people encounter and so forth can be quite difficult. So this is an incredibly profound effort where we have a huge unmet need, whether it's in our families, among our friends, or globally. And we don't really have tools that work well enough for enough people. And that's really what has motivated us to look at this area. And to have what, if Kachi were on this phone, my wife, she would say is an involuntary startup. We saw that the promise was too big, the need was too big to ignore this, and we created what is my now 5th startup. We are focused on treatment-resistant depression. We didn't do this thinking about this in the abstract. We actually spoke with governments in Europe, North America, the FDA, the European Medicines Agency. And the more we shared what we were looking at, they kept pointing us to treatment-resistant depression. This is a huge area. Depression is one of the largest burdens of disease. Just to put it into context, it's nearly as large as the people suffering from diabetes and from heart disease. So this is a very, very large population, sadly. Of those people, about 2/3 of them are helped by existing medicines, but 1/3 aren't. And when you do the math, that's over 100 million people. Not only is this a huge problem, but it's a huge contributor to global disability and a huge contributor to cost. The costs of depression alone are estimated at about 300 billion pounds. And I'm speaking to you from London in the UK, so we'll use that currency. So this is a huge area of unmet need. We have some tools, but not enough. The tools that we have often have difficult side effects. So all of this led the Food and Drug Administration in the United States to give us what they call a breakthrough therapy designation to look at this new medicine, this old medicine repurposed, psilocybin, as a treatment for depression. And they've called this a medical breakthrough, and they're doing everything they can to fast track our work, which is very rigorous research. No mushrooms are harmed. This is an active ingredient in magic mushrooms, but we're synthesizing it. So all of this work that we're doing is based on a drug product that is being manufactured to the highest global standards called GMP, or Good Manufacturing Practices, and has been approved by regulators around the world for use in humans in clinical trials, which we're now embarking upon. Our broad vision is to use this and other tools we're developing, other types of medicines, other technologies, to really create a world of mental well-being. And our vision will keep us motivated for the next many decades, we hope, as our team grows and our research pays off. And that's really the state that we're in right now. As I look at, share for those of you who are on the screen, you can see why we were so interested in this. As I mentioned, there was a whole bunch of new studies that were taking place. First started at UCLA in 2011, then some additional ones at New York University, Johns Hopkins, then one we helped sponsor at London Imperial College, which was really focusing on this issue of treatment-resistant depression, and there are additional studies ongoing. However, all these studies really focused on the next peer-reviewed paper and not really on patient access. But what was so important in these studies, if you look on the right-hand side of this page, is after a single dose of psilocybin, people have an immediate and sustained benefit for those people who do respond, which is over 80% of the people so far in the small trials, in depression, and that single treatment, because it changes the way they can look at the world and their narrative about the world, their narrative about their symptoms, what happens is that they often have a durable and sustainable benefit that can go on for months and in some cases up to a year from a single dose of this medicine that's given in a highly supportive clinical setting, in almost like a living room setting, where we're providing this medicine to patients one at a time with a therapist there to help support them. And the medicine creates a deep personal journey. People are asked to wear eye shades and listen to a special soundtrack that goes on for 7 hours. And in that experience, they often see their lives quite differently in quite a powerful way. And the therapist is there to help them make sense of what they're seeing, how they're experiencing it. The next day they come back and they actually have a conversation with a therapist. And quite often at that very first day, they have a profound change in their depression. They see their lives in a much broader way and one that is much less dominated by depression. They quite often have a sense of hopefulness, largely because they have a different narrative, a different view of their life, one where they see themselves as often shaping the reality in which they've been operating, a depressed reality, and seeing that they have a choice to perhaps have a more positive outlook. And this is a very, very powerful experience for people. In our work, we have to be really, really careful to do this and work globally with regulators, and this is really important. And all the work that we're doing is with regulatory agencies, whether it's the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, Health Canada in Canada, or the European Medicines Agency across 28 member states, at least for now, in Europe. And therefore, we have to work with regulators. Regulators are here in the world to really focus on one thing, which is to make sure that when people are making claims about medical treatment, there is research to back it up. And when things are not done in a regulated fashion, quite often you can have real difficulties, real health problems. And the most recent one that we're certainly seeing in the US and some parts of Europe relates to vaping, which is a way of delivering either cannabis or nicotine through a vapor. But that's an unregulated space. Sometimes people got ahead of themselves or were trying to cut corners, mix the active substances with dangerous substances, and we've had some real problems globally. The slide on your left, which says that we've had vaping injuries top 1,000 cases. Well, that was done about 2 months ago, and the deaths rose to 18. Well, fast forward 2 months, we now have over 2,500 cases and nearly 50 deaths. So this is something that it can happen when we have a substance that isn't carefully regulated and thoughtfully regulated. When we think about our work, we're doing clinical trials right now, and actually we're on the front page of the Financial Times today, as well as Newsweek and a number of other publications, with the results of our first clinical trial, which was a safety trial, which demonstrated that we could safely give psilocybin to healthy volunteers in groups of up to 6 with 1 therapist per person, and to do that successfully and not have any kind of adverse events, nor have any long-term cognitive or emotional problems. So this was a very important study that is laying the groundwork for future psychedelic medicine. We're now in the midst of another study, which is really balancing the benefit and the risk of this medicine, making sure that when we pick a group of patients like those suffering from treatment-resistant depression, these are people who have tried many, many medicines, sometimes electric shock therapy, and simply are not helped. And again, this is the number that tops 100 million globally. When we talk to them and start working with them, we want to make sure that the benefits of what we're doing is greater than the risks. And therefore, having a low-risk medication so far from our safety study really enables us to look at how we can help a lot of people. And we're really excited about that. So I do have a video for people that I will not show here, but we can put it up for people who participate in this call to actually give you a sense of what that psilocybin treatment looks like. For those of you, I mentioned earlier that this therapy is provided in almost a living room-like setting, and that the participants often have a much deeper sense of connectedness after the experience. We use specially designed treatment rooms and a specially designed playlist, a music playlist. And for those of you who are wondering, there is no Grateful Dead on it. I think the key thing for us is that this particular model of care is something that we believe could be really meaningful. And as one of our key advisors, the former head of the National Institute of Mental Health, sees this treatment as far more empowering, given that it's a single treatment that empowers people to see their lives in a different way and act on that new vantage point, rather than simply being a slave to taking the same medications day in, day out. So we think this is a very promising idea and a very promising approach. We're now undertaking clinical trials in 11 countries, 20 sites across Europe, the US, and Canada, and are looking with 216 patients suffering from treatment-resistant depression, whether this can make a really significant difference in their lives and which dose of psilocybin will provide the greatest benefit with the least side effects. So that's a bit of where we are, and I just thought I would end with a quote from one of the participants in a clinical trial the day after their session. I had such instant relief. I could make up my mind about things. It lifted the fog of depression. The way I felt after, I've not felt with any medicine or therapy. I forgot what depression was. With that, I'd like to thank everyone, and I'll open up for questions, comments, etc.
George, thank you. To submit questions, you have a chat box on your screen. It's on generally it's on the right side, depending on how you've got your screen set up. It says chat. And please submit the questions in that chat box, indicating organizers only. And we'll be able to take, George will be able to take questions. So George, this morning, I'm sorry?
I just wanted to add one thing that might come up because of the nature of this medicine, people have been taking it on their own and so forth. And quite often people will say, well, I've heard about bad trips and so forth. And I think that what we've been really focused in on is this is always given in a clinical setting with support. And that really makes a huge difference. We're not advocating that anyone do this outside of those particular settings. And what's really important is that when we do this in this setting, even this medicine doesn't work for everyone. And when you're developing a medicine, while you might think you would want something that was a panacea, we know in medicine that there is no such thing because of differences in genetic makeup and so forth. So while this is effective for many people, we believe, we know it isn't a panacea. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood the rigor and the scientific equipoise or balance that we're bringing to this before we go into the questions. So thanks, Dick. I'll now be quiet.
No. The last thing in the world we want is for you to be quiet. But yes, you've been getting an incredible amount of press because you're doing an amazing amount of work and really advancing this. A question that I would ask or ask you to share, if you would, is what are sort of the biggest challenges you're facing?
It was really interesting. We thought that we were going to have all sorts of challenges when we started to talk to governments and regulators. We expected a short conversation that kind of was, you're doing what to whom with what? And in fact, every single regulatory conversation we've had has been met with great interest and support, and that really surprised us. I think the big challenges that we're having is taking a medicine, which is an illegal substance, going through all of the paperwork to be able to manufacture an illegal drug, to ship it around the world to academic clinical trial sites, to have all of the permissions in place to do that. That's been a real challenge for us. And I think that so it's a huge administrative burden. We have about 150 people working on this particular trial right now around the world in all these different countries. So we're in 11 countries right now. We have 2 in final approvals, additional ones. So it's really about just the challenges of working with a Schedule 1 drug, which is the same schedule as LSD or heroin, and to be able to do that for research. So that's been really the biggest challenge. But everyone sees such a huge unmet need that they just really are interested in how they can help from a regulatory and government perspective. And that's been really very gratifying.
Great, great. I'd point out that Schedule 1 is broad enough that it even includes marijuana, which is...
Yes, that's true. In those countries where it is not, or states where it has not been made legal or decriminalized.
So we have a lot of questions here. Some of them are just a brief answer, and some of them you can elaborate on. What is the youngest age demographic you've worked with in a clinical setting? What is the youngest age that you're taking into your trial?
The youngest age at this point is 18 years old. And what we've agreed with regulators, since this has to be controlled very carefully, because the research has to focus on what happens for people below 18 and above 55. So we're working right now in the band of 18 to 55 or 18 to 65. We've just had a study approved for anorexia, which will go as low as 16 for people suffering with anorexia, which is a completely different area that we're investigating to see if psilocybin might be helpful.
Great, thank you. Any thoughts or comments? So I'll give a little bit of the context. There's also work being done by a group, MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Science, and the founder of that will be speaking on our next call, Rick Doblin, but I'll talk about that later. But the question that came in is, any thoughts on MDMA, which is what MAPS is using for post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, versus psilocybin and other psychedelics as potentially helpful in dealing with mental health issues?
So we're incredibly grateful, and actually we're one of the early supporters of MAPS as donors, as personal donors. I think their work is great. I think that there are a whole host of these substances, MDMA, psilocybin, which were investigated earlier, and then when they became illegal, all the research became very hard to do and very expensive. But we see promise from a variety of those medicines. And we even see LSD was the most widely used medicine from 1945 to 1965 in clinical settings. And it showed great promise for alcoholism, substance abuse, and depression, particularly depression related to people who had terminal diagnoses. So we see this as a very promising area. MAPS is certainly a leader in that with MDMA, or the active ingredient in ecstasy, which helps people deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's very, very useful for that in a way that is probably more useful than psilocybin, because it enables people to process trauma without the attendant fear. And that's a very, very powerful thing.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Question, what are the top research units in the United States? And you can broaden that to the world. I understand Johns Hopkins has just received significant fundings and NYU is doing work. Where else?
So NYU and Johns Hopkins, London Imperial College, or Imperial College in London, the University of Zurich, and UCLA were the kind of beacons initially. That has tremendously grown. We're working with leading academic centers around the world. We're now the largest funder of psychedelic research, having raised $55 million in the last 2 years. And so we have moved that out across Europe, working in the leading psychiatry departments. Our US sites, for example, are Columbia, Stanford, University of Texas, University of California at San Diego, Emory, and then across our countries in Europe. So this is something that is really growing. And I would say that one of the things we encountered was simply a view that when we came in with the kinds of people who are involved, which are the former head of the European Medicines Agency, for example, is on our board, the former chairman of Johnson & Johnson. When we have the kind of people and the resources to do this in a really very scientific way, we found a huge demand from leading institutions, including Oxford and all the ones I've mentioned. So this is a growing field.
Definitely, definitely. Just after George is completed, when we're sharing sort of work that we're involved in with, I'll be talking about some things that are going on with Harvard and Massachusetts General Hospital, the leading psychiatry department in the United States. that George and Compass are also very, very much involved with. Can you speak to how you are recruiting people for the trials, and for any people on the call who may have potential interest or relevance in participating, and where help?
Sure. So this goes, probably the best thing to do is to go on the clinical trials part of our website, compasspathways.com, and you can see the sites where they are, etc. For the current study, just so everyone knows, getting into a clinical trial is quite difficult because the screening is very, very rigorous. We probably have somewhere around 5% of the people who apply actually participate in the trial because of exclusion criteria, making sure that we really are, back to that slide I shared earlier, above all, do no harm. So there's quite a rigorous selection process. But right now the trial is for people who have 2 to 4 prior medications in depression that have not worked for them. If they fit that criterion, then they come in and they will be assessed for all sorts of other things. We can't have anyone who's had psychosis, schizophrenia, or bipolar depression in their family. They're excluded from the study. But there are many criteria, so the best thing to do would be to look under our clinical trials site on our website, compasspathways.com. And if you have any questions, there's also a place to be in touch with us that way.
Great, thank you. Question, how does this treatment, broaden that to treatment/experience, compare with other substances like ayahuasca or uses or potential uses of LSD?
So a couple advantages of psilocybin over those other things. One is that it was really hard for people to pronounce, and when you're trying to bring something new and they don't really know about it, it's better to have, we were out there with LSD, everybody would know what that is and kind of run away. So it was really helpful from an initial focus. But seriously, the issue is that LSD has a very, very long duration. So a typical LSD session is approximately 10 to 12 hours. It's a kind of like an international flight where you need a crew change of the therapist or the support. So it's not terribly practical in clinical practice. And our goal at Compass is to have a very affordable, available treatment because of the huge numbers involved. So we want something that can be given clinically really well. Psilocybin lasts 4 to 6 hours. Relative to ayahuasca, ayahuasca is a psychedelic brew made from usually 2 different substances, but it's literally made from plant substance. That means it's very difficult to regulate, to ensure that the same ayahuasca purity and potency is everywhere in the world. That's critically important for a medicine. You have to know when the medicine expires. You have to know the same dose is going to be the same quality everywhere on the planet. And that really leads you down the path of doing a synthetic version. So we have been developing synthetic psilocybin, synthetic LSD exists, synthetic ayahuasca is being explored but does not yet exist. And the same chemical in ayahuasca is present in psilocybin. It's DMT.
All right, thank you. Next question, are you a physician yourself, or can you explain, well, I'm expanding it to, can you explain how your background and experiences may be relevant to what you are doing with Compass, in addition to your personal experience?
Sure. So I've been, in my life, I've done a lot of work on developing clinical trials in various businesses, whether we're supporting those or actually working with the pharmaceutical industry on new practices for regulation. So I'm not a physician. I'm trained as a cognitive scientist and clinical psychologist before I became a serial entrepreneur, because I didn't want to work one patient at a time, just the way I'm wired. I think the biggest skill I have is getting great people to come together and work on this. So we have just incredible talent in our team. And again, it's a very large team of people who have regulatory experience, medical research, scientists. We have clinical researchers. Our senior team is a person with 30 years experience leading clinical trials around the world in central nervous system diseases. We have one of the leaders of depression research working for us, being our chief medical officer. We have a head of R&D who's just coming in, who's working with us from GW Pharma, which is a company that has 2 successful applications of cannabis for multiple sclerosis and epilepsy, approved again in multiple countries. So we have a really good team. Our chief commercial officer is the person who led innovation at Johnson & Johnson and has been responsible for innovative business models where patients are brought together and helped, not where the company takes responsibility for the health and well-being of a patient population rather than just the selling of a medicine. So we have a really good team, and I think I often think of myself much more as a casting director and CEO than anything else. We have an incredible team of very competent scientists and medical people.
Which is a great segue to the next question. But before saying that, I just want to say that George is showing up on your screen as Dick Simon, which is a huge upgrade in my image, but that is George Goldsmith you are looking at, and there's a glitch.
I thought I would come out, but only partially, and Dick has been channeling me, so here we are. Or I'm channeling Dick, hard to tell.
Great. So can you please share some information about Compass's business model, current status of the business, and vision for the future?
Yeah, our vision is that we are, I'll start there, again, a world of mental well-being. What does that mean? I think long-term, and this is a decades vision, that we create what we're referring to as a predictive, preventative, and precision model of mental health care. In an ideal world, that means we actually understand how people are doing, that we have technology that will help support them in that journey. We're developing some of that technology in partnership with a company called MindStrong, which is a well-funded Silicon Valley startup. And our business model is right now doing clinical trials. So we are raising money, and as any biotech or life sciences company would, we are doing a very robust set of clinical trials. We're currently in phase 2B. If that's successful, then we will go to phase 3 trials. We're currently focused on a single indication, but have quite a number of other indications in earlier stage research with psilocybin and with other substances. And our long-term goal is to be able to provide people with a real sense of how they're doing and how we can improve their mental health and well-being. We're starting with patients with very severe conditions, treatment-resistant depression. But our business model is to be a partner in mental health to payers, to providers, and to individuals, and to make this care really quite affordable. And that's our goal. You can make money in business, as everyone on this phone knows, 2 ways. You can have high prices and low volume, or high volume and low prices. And given the scale of impact, the scale of need, we're really designing everything so we can be more of the latter.
Great, thank you. How long has the research shown that the positive effects on depression last, and what is the recommendation on repeating the treatment?
So this is the science that we're really working on. These are the key questions, and I think they're really great questions that we simply don't have answers to at this point. The trials that have been done to date have been relatively small. I think the largest trial was, until the one we announced today, was simply 50 people. Now this current trial that we just announced was 90 people or 89 people. The one we're doing is 216. And really what we found, what we've seen in the earlier research, is that it's quite unpredictable. Some people have a benefit that lasts a matter of weeks. Some people have a benefit from the same dose that can last 3 months. And some people have gone as long as a year. In the pilot study I referenced earlier at London Imperial, 27% of people who suffered prior, on average of 18 years with 5 failed treatments, ended up 27% lasted a year without any other medicine or psychotherapy. Obviously, that's an uncontrolled study, and we really need to do the hard work that we're doing to answer the question. We envision most likely that it will be a set of 1 or more doses, and that's what we're doing this research to determine.
Great, thank you. Just next question, does this actually rearrange the neurological patterns in the brain, and if so, in what ways?
So this is a really interesting quality of this. There have been some it's interesting that this research really is now possible in a way it wasn't even 10 years ago, with the advent of advances in neuroscience, particularly fMRI, which actually shows blood flow and activity in the brain, coupled with very detailed EEG, for example, some new methods. What is seen with this medicine is that it does seem to create very new connections. And when you look at scans of people who are on psilocybin versus before and during, before the connections are very limited, very focused. And when you do a scan with someone on psilocybin, you see huge amounts of connectivity in very different parts of the brain, much greater connectivity. And this really also is seen to lead to an increased neuroplasticity and openness to learning. And I have to admit that I may not have emphasized enough, psilocybin therapy is not just a medicine, but it's actually preparation for people to prepare them for this experience. Then follow-up therapy, a couple sessions, not more, which really helps them make sense and learn new skills of how to cope with their depression. So we do see increases in neuroplasticity indicated in some scans, and we're also seeing a change in kind of how people interact. This also works very much with the serotonin system, specifically a serotonin receptor called 5-HT2A, and so that's where we're absolutely working.
All right. Will you eventually be expanding to researching other plant-based psychoactive medicines such as ayahuasca?
We do not see a path to develop ayahuasca specifically because of the very, very large inconsistencies in how it is brewed. And so we're not quite sure, but we are looking at other substances, some of which are plant-derived, some of which are not.
All right. Can you comment? Next is please comment on the issues of for-profit, not-for-profit, and different ways that people are looking at this, and why you chose for Compass a for-profit model.
Well, we actually started out as a nonprofit looking at how we could help support small studies, the way that they're doing at Johns Hopkins. We never took anyone else's money. We just set that up getting ready to do that. And then we met with the European Medicines Agency, and they told us that, look, this is going to be very promising. We'd like you to do it, but it's a couple $100 million to bring a medicine to market at scale with an indication as large as depression. If you have an indication that affects fewer people, the trials can be smaller. We then spent time speaking with a counselor, an advisor of ours who runs Bridgespan Consulting, former chairman of Bain, also a YPOer. And Tom Tierney really recommended that we answer 3 questions, which we did. Is there a market? Yes, there is. Is there a product? Yes, there is. Is there an end customer? Well, actually, there are health systems and patients, so yes, there are. And with those 3 questions, his view was that the cost of capital doing this as a nonprofit would make no sense. And it was very hard to raise hundreds of millions of donations. And one might even argue, given where things are now, MAPS started 30 years ago where that was the only path. But where we are now, I would even assert that donating money for clinical trials in which there are markets is actually just taking that money out of other areas where there is a clear need, whether that would be education, peace activities, etc. Here we have a very well articulated way to do this. And so that's why we're a for-profit company, because we can raise the money that we need to do by having a clear benefit. The other thing I would note is that we wish MAPS a tremendous amount of success, and at the same time, there's no example of a not-for-profit bringing a medicine to a large indication at scale. Most of the nonprofits that have been involved in medicine development have partnered with pharmaceutical companies over time in order to reach patients, etc.
Great. And Rick Doblin, who's the founder and chair of MAPS, will be on our next conference call February 4th. And people can ask that question and get his perspective on it.
Which
Great.
would be different, but we love to be on the same panel together.
Right, and actually, George and Rick Doblin were on a panel together, a YPO chapter. They've been done it many times at the GLC and Edge in Cape Town, South Africa for YPO, at Harvard Business School together, and most recently, last weekend, at the YPO Aspen chapter. So one of the things, and I'll mention it later, for people on the call, is to think of, if in their chapter or in other contexts, there's a large group who is interested in knowing more and understanding this. George or others are available, and this Psychedelic Medicine for Mental Health group, we're happy to help coordinate that. George, just because there are a couple of, go ahead.
I just should mention one other thing. I think that what's really important is some people assert that for-profit somehow has to be evil and will not work well. I think the code of conduct is what's really important, and how one conducts and the values by which this medicine is provided. And I think that that's something that's very, very core. And I think the distance between us and nonprofits in terms of the spirit and the values by which we're working are much closer than you might imagine.
Right, thank you. Can you just clarify, in case anyone, because I just received another question along that line, are your trials being, can you just clarify that you are internally funding your own trials rather than having external relations with other pharmaceutical companies or other that are directly funding your trials? There seems to be a little bit of confusion.
Our funders are predominantly hedge funds, venture funds, and family offices. And we have no other relationships with pharmaceutical companies. This is our company. We're a mental health care company. We're doing all of our trials in partnership with a clinical research organization, Worldwide Clinical Trials, but there is no pharmaceutical industry involvement in our company at this point.
Great, thank you. And there's a note here, I'll leave the person anonymous because it wasn't clear as if they wanted to be identified, but the person who was a former chair of YPO, and congratulating you on your new startup. Michelle and I continue to watch with great admiration. They're wondering about market adjacencies, and will these therapies only be for depression, or will there be other good uses for the protocols?
Well, given Michelle, thank you. I know who you are.
No, I knew you would, but I didn't want to.
But at this point, what we're looking at is purely clinical conditions, because that's what we're developing. We're developing this as a medicine. This isn't something that we are developing for recreational purposes. We don't think there are enough data for that yet. And we're very much data driven and looking to do this in the most responsible fashion. So we are focusing right now on treatment resistant depression. We will look at other indication areas. You know, I think, yeah, that's probably sufficient.
Okay.
Did I miss something in your question at all, Dick? Or
no, I think you market adjacencies, but I think that's essentially what you just addressed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there, just so I should mention that market adjacencies, obviously there will need to be clinics and places where this medicine is administered. We will not be going into the clinic business, so to speak. We'll be looking to partner with those. So there's a great deal of people using ketamine right now in clinics, and we plan to work through those types of clinics to develop this using our specially trained therapists and processes that we'll be certifying. But those will be adjacencies in terms of people who are thinking about this in the real world.
All right, thank you. When are you expecting that this might be available treatment for outside of trials?
I think that we're thinking 2023, 2024, if everything goes well. There is a very slight chance, but we have been asked to make enough medicine if the slight chance were to happen, where there could be something in Europe called a conditional approval, where we can make it available while at the same time continuing to do research. And I think this is a really important thing, because typically pharmaceutical companies do research, they then stop research, they start selling, And that's when the difficulty happens, when more and more people take it. So we're very supportive of an ongoing research effort as a responsible way to develop a medicine.
Great. Question here, are you looking for investors, clinicians, patients participating in your trial? How can people interact with you, or any comment on any of those three?
Probably the easiest thing to do is to go onto our website where there's a contact us button and write to us. We're obviously, we're right now completing a Series B fundraising round that's oversubscribed but not closed yet. And so, and then from a physician perspective, you know, we are signing up academic sites. Our phase 3 program will start about a year from now, maybe a year and a half. We'll need many more sites for that. So, and we're very actively involved in working with physicians and patient organizations on both sides of the Atlantic right now.
All right. And then for those where it is not, well, for anybody, the question was for those where it is not effective, any comment on side effects or long-term potential adverse lasting side effects on mood, cognition, health, whatever?
So I think what we have to do is be very careful to separate this kind of controlled administration from taking magic mushrooms in the wild, which can be quite meaningful for people, but also can pose some risks. In the clinical trials, in the clinical application, what we see is a very, very good safety profile, and that's what was just reported out yesterday at the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology. Side effects that tend to dissipate within certainly 24 hours. Some people have headaches, some people feel quite tired after the experience because it's quite full on. Some people have a bit of anxiety as they're experiencing this for the first time. But aside from that, there really are no long-term side effects that have been discerned so far, but that's why we're doing the research, to really do that rigorously. This is the first time that we brought 21st century standards into developing this medicine at scale. So this is an area that we're carefully watching, but so far so good.
All right. There remain many more questions, but since part of the intent of this call, and we'll see how it works after, is to allow people to sort of network and share together projects that they're involved in, and you've already very graciously gone, 10 minutes past what you had volunteered to do. Thank you. I guess two things. And I'd invite you to stay on, because there may be all sorts of additional questions and possibilities. So if people can be thinking for a moment about if they want to share anything that they are involved with in terms of research or science, where you might want others to be involved or at least aware of what is going on. But George, the question that I'd like to ask you to please, for two things, are there any last thoughts you want to make sure people leave the call with? And then very important is, how can YPOers and others on the call get involved, make a difference, and otherwise help or support or expand or destigmatize or whatever you think might be appropriate? In addition to chapter programs, in addition to joining the Psychedelic Medicine for Mental Health group to become more informed, but just any thoughts or suggestions on either your key takeaways as well as what people could further engage, or what you'd love to see?
Well, I think the key takeaway for everyone is to make sure that mental health can be part of the conversations you have with families, friends, coworkers, etc. I think that too many people suffer in silence. This is something that can take a huge toll on people, and we just don't talk about it enough. And I think that the stigma is greatly declined. There are tools, there are ways to help now. And so I think the first and foremost message, whether it's in YPO forum or not to have this be taboo, and to really actually have the conversation and seek support. So that's the key thing to do, which doesn't require clinical trials or anything else. I think in terms of broader support, Clearly, there's a need for research. You'll cover on some of the research programs for early stage research. And I think just following this area and talking to people about it is really important, because when the trials are successful, that's actually crossing the starting line. It's not the finish line. And that's when things really begin. So we need to till the soil well.
Great. And along the lines of staying informed and remaining informed, again, I would invite people to do a couple of things. One is join, if you're not yet a member and you're in YPO, join the Psychedelic Medicine for Mental Health group. Secondly, definitely tune in on February 4th for Rick Doblin's global conference call. You can sign up now, bit.ly/Rick Doblin. So it's bit.ly/Rick Doblin. Now what I would like to do is move into the phase of, and George, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time wherever you are in the world, and really look forward to getting to meet more of you as we go on this journey together.
Great. And along that, and thank you, along that line, now is the opportunity for people who want to share anything that they are involved in this space along the line of research or therapy or other activities like that. I will share two to just sort of model, and if you have things you want to share, please put it in that same questions box. First is Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard University are creating a center around psychedelics that it looks like it'll be a very significant endeavor, looking at all of the actual mechanisms of action as well as potential therapeutics. So for those with interest in that, they can reach out to me, and you can do it. You've been getting emails from me, so you've got an easy way of doing that, and I'll include that. But the really interesting thing about that is because Mass General is so well connected throughout the world, and their psychiatry department continues to get ranked as the top psychiatry department in the country, in the US. And the chief of that department, Jerry Rosenbaum, is going to be leading this new center. So there's tremendous potential there with the involvement with Harvard, which is great. Second,
and I just would like to mention that this is such an important idea that Katya and I are becoming big supporters of that area, of that research, and would very much welcome others to join us. That's as personal donors, nothing to do with Compass. We're just providing the medicine free of charge for all the research.
And I'll just add, because George is too modest, they are becoming very significant donors, which is deeply appreciated, both by those of us involved with that, but ultimately by the world in general, because of the great work that can be done there with your support and that of others. So for people interested, but I also want to say that there are great centers that are being also created. We had mentioned a couple before at NYU and Hopkins. Hopkins recently received $17 million, but Columbia is creating one. Mount Sinai Hospital. There are a lot going on around the country. And again, through this Psychedelic Medicine for Mental Health group, there's the potential for connecting people around that. The second thing I wanted to mention, and then if there are ways of people submitting questions or comments, we can do it that way through the same question box that people have been using. But the second is we created something in Boston that I would highly encourage others who are curious.
My apologies.
Okay. That I would highly encourage others interested. We created something called the Boston Psychedelic Research Group, which was originally set up like 16 months ago as an opportunity. What we thought we were doing was, find young researchers who needed potentially some funding or some networking and just some mentoring support, and we might be able to do that. Well, that morphed from a dozen people in someone's backyard to over 100 people now coming to meetings that occur every 2 months. This next one coming up with Robin Carhart Harris, looks like we'll have over 200 people there. The reason I bring this up is it's an incredibly valuable opportunity, as we've learned across the board from those, and George and his wife Katya have graciously come and spoken at this, as Rick Doblin and many of the leaders in this space. But the opportunity is for people in a geographic area, in our case, Boston, but there are similar efforts underway in Washington, D.C., San Francisco. And one of the things that we're doing in this BPRG, we call it Boston Psychedelic Research Group, is helping other groups like this form around the country and ultimately in Europe and elsewhere. It is a great opportunity to get together with researchers of all levels, heads of top psychiatric facilities in the respective cities, psychologists and other therapists who are interested either in doing current ketamine work or other work, as well as media and funders. So any people who are in cities that have any of this kind of work going on, and it's now becoming a more extensive list, can reach out and happy to help support that. So I don't know what has happened. I'm not, okay. So Paul, we have a note, and what I'll do afterwards is, I guess, the way we'll figure this out differently. Again, you all are very gracious being in this pilot where we're figuring out a piece of technology, how to get people unmuted so that they can actually speak directly. But in Vancouver, Paul Koselich has reached out and said that he's doing psychedelic psychotherapy involved with advocacy work in Canada and supporting clinical initiatives of a local startup. So others who are similarly involved in supporting clinical initiatives, wherever it may be, one of the things we found out through this Boston Psychedelic Research Group is the potential for subnetworks or affinity groups to have huge impact by people getting together and working together. Very good. Well, we are at the top of the hour. I tremendously thank everyone. You will be getting a survey, and what I really encourage you to do, unlike sort of other surveys where it's like just all about the rating, here we're trying to figure out how to most effectively do this in the future. And so your honest, sincere feedback, suggestions, comments, people who maybe we should be adding, ways of doing this somewhat differently are invited and welcome. Thank you. Again, please sign up for the Psychedelic Medicine for Mental Health group if you're not yet involved. Please reach out if you are in YPO and interested in having potential chapter meetings. Reminder about the February 4th Global Conference call. And thank you so much for joining, and look forward to reconnecting again February 4th, if not before. Thanks, and this call is now ending. Thank you so much, George.
Thank you.